So there is some disagreement as to the ending of the Gospel of Mark among scholars. Some of our earliest manuscripts end with Mark 16:8, which is this: So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And if your Bible contains more, it's not the ending in apparently the oldest and original version of Mark. And there are various endings of the Gospel of Mark found in various locations. But here they talk about the church fathers. And the longer ending is mentioned by, the shorter ending is mentioned by Eusebius, Jerome, and others. The longer ending by Irenaeus and others. Scholars believe that Mark originally ended with the shorter ending, and that as far as the dating goes, this is all Wikipedia, because of patristic evidence from the late 100s for the existence of copies of Mark with the longer ending, Mark 16:9 through 20, scholars widely date the composition of the longer ending to the early 2nd century. So most scholars think that the ending, especially the part that talks about drinking poisons and being unharmed, picking up snakes and having control over them and so forth. But really everything after the women go away afraid from the tomb has been added to the gospel, at least as of the early 100s or the early 2nd century, which could be 70 to 100 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And there's evidence for this textually. And if you read the article on Wikipedia and you pull up Mark 16, it will go into detail and, of course, give you a lot of citations, and you can follow up on this. So people speculate as to what this means. Why would Mark? People also think that Mark's gospel was the first that was written, down. Why would the first gospel that was written down not contain, for instance, stories about the appearances of Jesus after the resurrection? And also, if you notice, once you get past verse 8 in chapter 16, you have things that are reminiscent of some of the other gospels, like two of the disciples meeting him, the resurrected Christ, as they were on their way on the road, which would be, of course, although Mark doesn't mention it, or whoever added this doesn't mention it, the road to Emmaus. There are things that seem to refer to the endings of the other gospels. So there's still debate about this, and it's interesting as to why this might be the case, that Mark would have ended his gospel as he did. Some people think maybe there was a lost portion of it from earlier, before the early 2nd century, that we haven't found. At any rate, it's not just a trick of scholars. There really is this. People who look at the early manuscripts find these different versions of it, and the earliest ones seem to be the shorter versions, but it's up in the air. So it's one of the scholarly debates that people argue about. And of course, it's ultimately based upon evidence, or the lack of evidence and arguments that are made from that, because scholarship and literary criticism and biblical criticism ought to be based on evidence, archaeological evidence, textual evidence, and so forth. It shouldn't be just something that we guess at, although sometimes we have to do a fair amount of guessing. Still, I thought I'd point that out.